You could say, one of the most uncomfortable aspects of grief is the brain fog that happens, right? It's not something that we usually talk about, right? So just in that one little sentence, you've normalized that this happens in grief, right? It's so hard for me. Like I used to be so witty, and the brain fog and the forgetting words and stuff that often comes with grief is just something I didn't expect. If somebody is like, or saying it, or you're perceiving some judgment around it, you can say, all the things that we know about extreme stress and how it affects your brain and your ability to like understand things and make sense. Grief is stress, so the same things happen, right? That's actually one of the ways that when I do a lecture on what is normal grief, right, is if we think about all of the ways that we understand the way that stress impacts the brain, cognitive processes, physical processes, how it impacts interpersonal skills and relationships. Grief is stress, right? So grief impacts all of the things that you would expect great stress to impact. That's more than a one-liner, but if somebody gives you some pushback with like, what is wrong with you? You don't have to fully describe it, but you're making, again, like that little opening for somebody to say, is it normal for people to like get completely flaky inside grief? And you can say, yeah. And then you can even, if you really wanted to go further, you could say things like, there's some really scary but cool studies out over the last couple of years on the impact of grief on cognitive processes, right? So you got a whole bunch of cool things like that you can use. There's also, there's a book called The Grieving Brain that is up there on my shelf that you can't see. I think it's Mary Frances O'Connor. I think that's her name. But The Grieving Brain, so if you wanted one extra thing, you could say, I'm really glad that there's a book called The Grieving Brain, because otherwise I would think I was losing my mind, right? So a couple of selections here, depending on how embarrassed you're feeling, how frustrated you're feeling, and what the relationship is in there, right? But it doesn't have to be overly complicated or even overly long. It's just acknowledging it with a subtle, this is so normal and I just wasn't expecting it. I think it's also useful to say those things to yourself, right? You were describing like if I'm with somebody and they like I do it and I'm embarrassed, but also because it's such a devastating isn't really the word that I want, but like it's such a shock, especially if you feel like you used to be like quick and on top of things and witty and you could comprehend complex things. And now you're like, I don't know how to make change for a 5, right? Be able to say those things to yourself too, right? Like, yeah, the cognitive impact of grief was not something I was expecting. It's a lot. Yeah. So extend your one-liners to yourself in your own company too.